It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
This is the 255th consecutive weekly installment of the commercial-free Global Alert News Hour. In this broadcast, I'll cover breaking reports on the most critical threats we collectively face. I'm going to kick this broadcast off with a rapid-fire succession of breaking frontline headlines. There are multiple sources for these breaking reports. Search the exact headline title online to locate these reports. After this succession of headlines, we'll begin to connect dots on a more detailed level. The threats we face are existential. Our reality is changing by the day. The sooner we face these truths, the more chance we will have of making a difference for the better. First headline: the depression dominoes are toppling. And there's a commentary from the source, one of the sources that listed this headline's Rice Farmer Blogspot. Excellent source for unbiased, non-political posts from around the world. But the commentary is this: once you allow your economy to become dependent on extremes of debt, leverage, inequality, legalized looting, monopoly, pay-to-play politics, and speculative asset bubbles, a depression is inevitable. But the fact is, it's much worse than that commentary would indicate. This is not just a depression. It's not a bump in the road. It's not a temporary scenario. Climate and biosphere collapse will dictate all, and that is the bottom line factor in everything that's unfolding, including the engineered COVID-19 scenario. Another headline: Barcelona's epic tourism boom is over. Now the crisis begins. Another headline: impossible to sugarcoat the disastrous unemployment claims made this week. Another headline: gold poised to challenge $1,800 per ounce as virus resurgence fans demand. Can't eat that yellow metal. Again, the greatest commodity soon will be what you can eat, drink, or shelter with. Another headline: weak demand prompts Macy's to cut 3,900 jobs and push to save cash. Just another sinking ship. Another headline: Qantas cuts 6,000 jobs and grounds international fleet for at least 12 months. Another headline: Lufthansa draws up, quote, Plan B to avoid insolvency, sources say. Another headline: Latin America's airlines are crashing. Another headline: airlines threaten to ban travelers who refuse to wear face masks. Later in this broadcast, I'll have a follow-up on the face mask wearing subject. Another headline: Iran and Venezuela won't back down from resisting U.S. sanctions, nor should they. Iran and Venezuela being only two of the many, many nations that have been repeatedly brutalized by the U.S. empire and Western powers who are pursuing the natural resources in those nations. That's what it's about. Another headline: global oil discovered was 7.7 times less than consumption in 2019. How long can that equation continue? Another headline: Argentina and Brazil monitor massive locust swarms spreading everywhere again. This is related to too much rain in the wrong places at the wrong times, repeatedly happening, spawning these locust swarms that are devouring crops, miring societies, and increased difficulty. You can't disconnect even a scenario like this from climate engineering, because the climate engineers control the flow of precipitation, period. That's hard science. So though some might think it's a leap to connect the locust swarms with climate engineering, it's absolutely connected. Climate engineers can shut the spigot off anytime they want, as they have done to so many places around the planet, as they're doing to parts of the world right now that they're preparing to burn soon. Reasons behind that as well. I'll get to that later in the broadcast. Another headline: new study finds China and EU soy imports are increasing Brazil's deforestation. No surprise. Another headline: researchers revealed changes in water of Canadian Arctic. Grave ramifications there. Again, more on that later in the broadcast, but let's add some similar headlines. Same theme: Siberian heat wave is a, quote, warning cry from the Arctic. The disintegrating ozone layer is never mentioned in any of the science articles. They're desperately trying to deny that, but you can feel the searing sun on your skin when you get a clear shot of it, and that is not your imagination. The ozone layer is disintegrating. That by itself is a potential extinction level event. Another headline: activists allege cover-up as toxic Siberian fuel spill reaches Arctic Ocean. Again, trashing the planet in the geologic blink of an eye from countless directions. Next headline, U.S. May exports sink to 11-year low as imports drop. Another headline, AT&T layoffs 2020, thousands of jobs cut, 250 stores to close. Next headline, BMW to cut 6,000 jobs. Next headline, another 1.5 million U.S. workers file for unemployment insurance. Next headline, state, local governments need billions more in aid to avert 4 million layoffs. Next headline, business uncertainty about sales goes haywire. Another headline, IMF, International Monetary Fund, slashes its forecasts for the global economy and warns of soaring debt levels. Another headline, quote, a staggering number of over 18 trillion in global stimulus in 2020. That's 21% of world GDP. A snake eating its own tail. Another headline, default wave arrives. Weekly bankruptcy filings suddenly soar. Another headline, boomers struggle to save enough for retirement. Survey finds they won't need to worry about their retirement. They'll have much more pressing needs very soon, like food, water, shelter. Another headline, meet BlackRock, the new great vampire squid. Remember that name, BlackRock. Dig deeply. They're at the core of so much criminality, chaos, and carnage. What nations are they connected to? Research that. See what you find. Perhaps a nation that we are not allowed to mention. A last headline on unfolding collapse. This one from marketsanity.com. Quote, false statistics cannot hide the collapse. Question, is collapse fueling power structure infighting? Are the power structure piranhas beginning to feed on each other? Let's hope so. A final headline from rollingstone.com. John Bolton tells on Trump and on himself. Here's one excerpt from the report which can be found online. Quote, Bolton is an elitist swamp creature. Trump is a populist demagogue. For the record, both dodged military service in Vietnam. Is Joe Biden or the other side of the political fence any different, any better? No, they're two sides of the same coin. Here's the bottom line. Industrialized, militarized civilization is circling the drain. The former reality was completely unsustainable. It's gone. It's not coming back. What is yet to be determined is if any will make it through what's now unfolding. COVID-19 is a power structure response to the climate and environmental collapse. Collapse was in progress long before COVID. Geoengineeringwatch.org has warned of the coming collapse for over a decade. The storm is now unfolding. It would seem prudent to prepare for impact. This theme will carry various meanings and conclusions for various individuals. Each must assess the unfolding horizon for themselves. Each must decide for themselves what actions or preparations are reasonable at this time, as our species, and indeed life on Earth, free falls ever further into uncharted territory, into the abyss. What can be said with certainty is this: the former reality, again, is over. It was never sustainable, and it's not coming back. How did we get here? And why have so few seen it coming? And even now, precious few are willing to look squarely at the horizon without turning away. The ongoing engineered COVID-19 scenario is but one of the immediate assaults against populations being waged by those who control from behind the curtain. There are, in fact, countless agendas being carried out as the great unraveling accelerates. But all of it, ultimately, is tied directly to the background of Earth's collapsing life support systems. Yes, hang on. The storm is upon us, and it will get rapidly worse from here on out. Only days before his assassination, John F. Kennedy said this: there's a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child. Before I leave this high and noble office, I intend to expose this plot. That was 7 days before his assassination. He's the last one to hold the office of the White House and to draw a line in the sand with those who truly wield power. Last one. Everything since is simply a facade, a divide and conquer orchestrated theater of the absurd. Kennedy's words from so long ago are more relevant now than ever. The scenario he described is global, and again, directly connected to biosphere collapse and the exponentially increasing power structure desperation because of it. Where were the warnings from academia? Where? Not only has academia failed to tell the truth on countless critical issues, but so many within the ranks of academia have been active or passive participants in either the development of dangerous and destructive technologies or the deception of the public regarding those technologies. Academia has also failed to tell the truth regarding the gravity and immediacy of biosphere collapse. This is in so many fields of study: medical, environmental, climate science. So many have either actively or passively participated in deception and cover-up regarding, again, the gravity and immediacy of biosphere collapse, a factor which will very soon make all other concerns and or challenges moot. Nikola Tesla said this, quote, "The scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly." He went on to say this, "One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane." Again from Tesla. In regard to populations, former presidential advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski stated this, quote, "Shortly, the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot the information they've been given on the previous night's news." I am so sad to say that is so true at this point. And that paradigm, that factor must be broken. The public must be awakened to what's unfolding and why, or we have no chance. On that note, another non-mainstream media headline report from last week, quote, "Initial COVID-19 trials, the world's deadliest vaccine, question mark. 1 in 5 phase 1 COVID-19 vaccine volunteers suffered severe systemic side effects, suggesting vaccinating the global population would gravely injure as many as 1.5 billion people, and likely more, since only exceptionally healthy individuals were included in this study." Now let's add this new headline report to the equation. COVID-19 vaccine trials begin in Africa. Our African brothers and sisters used as lab rats. Again, nothing new. All of us are actually in this category at this point. Those who have eyes to see the ongoing jet aircraft aerosol spraying dispersions in our skies recognize this to be a reality. And again, back to data covered on previous broadcasts for the Global Alert News Hour, COVID has been found attached to atmospheric airborne particulates. The extremely uniform spread of the COVID pathogen around the globe would indicate the possibility, if not the likelihood, of aerial dispersion. We had 25 nations in the first wave, and we had 85 nations in the second wave where the outbreaks exploded. When we have former government scientists, and I played that recording on this broadcast too many times already, but Ken Caldera, former U.S. government scientist, stating on the record that one of his jobs for the government was to design ways of seeding clouds with pathogens to infect the populations below. And Mr. Caldera now works for, guess who? Bill Gates. Is that any surprise? And Bill Gates called Mr. Caldera on the record his amazing teacher. That's on the gatesnotes.com website. Are these dots hard to connect? Gates involved with the engineering of the pathogen, Anthony Fauci, the National Institute of Health, on peer-reviewed science report, responsible for the gain of function aspect of this virus that allowed it to not only jump to humans, but it is in fact now more effective at infecting humans than any other life form. That's an engineered pathogen. That's not a pathogen that just by a random act of nature made a jump to humans with all these other traits. And I'll get to some of those other traits in a few moments, bear with me, because some of them are far worse than we've been told. And yes, statistically, the impact of this pathogen has been inflated, but that doesn't mean the threat is not real. and that it's not growing, and that it can't be stoked, as those in power choose to stoke the fires with various versions of this pathogen, some of them increasingly lethal. And we do have those mutated forms now showing up. There'll be more and more data coming out on that, certainly as we press on into the future. But bear with me for a moment. I'll cover some of those traits in a report just released yesterday. But first this. In a well-documented report from healthychoice.org, the following data and data-supported conclusion. SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, infant death rate sees sharp decline. From the report, in recent months, with massive disruptions in family life and amid near universal lockdowns in America and elsewhere, but in America, roughly 30% fewer infants died. 30%. Continuing from the report, quote, one very clear change that has received publicity is that public health officials are bemoaning the sharp decline in infant vaccinations as parents are not taking their infants into pediatric offices for their regular well-being checks. In the May 15th issue of the CDC Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, a group of authors from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente reported a sharp decline in provider orders for vaccines, as well as a decline in pediatric vaccine doses administered. Those declines began early in March, about the same time as the infant deaths began declining. Connect those dots. America is the most vaccinated nation on the planet, and thus tragedies like SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, are off the charts here in this nation. We're injecting neurotoxins into our children, into us, along with a host of other toxic elements. How hard is this to connect and conclude rationally on? It shouldn't be hard. On this subject, a general report I want to make mention of. The following report was issued last week from the chuckbaldwinlive.com. Here's the headline of that report. Pastors and physicians, from protectors to predators. Here's one small excerpt from that report. Historically, society has deemed pastors and physicians two of its most sacred callings. Pastors watched over our souls while physicians watched over our bodies. The duties of each office were both respected and protected in our nation's most important documents and doctrines. But in only months, our federal government has turned both professions from that of protector to that of predator. And in fact, it goes back much farther than only months. It's only gotten exponentially worse in recent months. But I certainly appreciate Dr. Baldwin for his continued outspokenness on the dire and immediate challenges that we face in today's unraveling world. Pressing on from multiple sources, the World Health Organization says asymptomatic transmissions are rare and then backtracks. For that report, a key World Health Organization official said in no uncertain terms that asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19 is, quote, very rare. A day later, World Health Organization quickly walked back the statement, calling it a, quote, misinterpretation and a misunderstanding. Consider that the COVID-19 scenario is completely engineered, starting with the pathogen itself. This conclusion is not opinion. It's peer-reviewed science study report, proven fact. Anyone within the power structure-controlled agencies or corporate media that departs from the official narrative will be immediately dealt with, as was the case with this World Health Organization official. But what's the bottom line risk regarding the engineered COVID-19 scenario? This new report should be considered from Reuters and other sources issued yesterday. Quote, scientists just beginning to understand the many health problems caused by COVID-19. From that report, again, yesterday. Scientists are only starting to grasp the vast array of health problems caused by the novel coronavirus, some of which may have lingering effects on patients and health systems for years to come, according to the doctors and infectious disease experts. Besides the respiratory issues that leave patients gasping for breath, the virus that causes COVID-19 attacks many organ systems, in some cases causing catastrophic damage. The report states, we thought this was only a respiratory virus. Turns out it goes after the pancreas, it goes after the heart, it goes after the liver, the brain, the kidney, and other organs. COVID-19 is an engineered bioweapon. There are likely many strains of it. The weapon of choice for those in power to control and slow cull populations as the former paradigm can no longer be maintained. Mainstream media, academia, official agencies, elected officials, so many are participating either actively or passively with an ever-increasing array of crimes and cover-ups, the most dire of which ultimately is the exponentially accelerating abrupt climate and environmental collapse. The climate engineering, aka weather warfare assault, is further fueling the process. The ongoing atmospheric aerosol spraying operations are likely also being used for biological operations. Connect the dots. A critical mass of public awakening must be achieved if we're to have any chance of changing course. Time is absolutely not on our side. In a moment, the most critically important breaking headlines on the most dire threats we faced. First, to each and every individual that's doing their best to stay informed, to wake others, and to help turn the tide, thank you. More than I can ever express. It is our collective efforts that can yet make a difference. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour, episode number 255, June 27th, 2020. In this broadcast, news that covers the issues we must face if we're to have any chance of averting near-term planetary omnicide. This commercial-free frontline news broadcast is brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org, paid for by geoengineeringwatch.org. This news hour is broadcast throughout Northern California, 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM, Saturday morning, 6 to 7, Sunday morning, same time slot, repeat broadcast. Also re-aired East Coast by the PRN Radio Network, Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Recordings of this broadcast can be found at geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent top stories and radio sections. The latest Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials, printed materials, can be ordered from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. Again, a picture is worth 1,000 words. We only try to recover our costs from these printed materials. Our only goal is to get them into circulation. This can be done, again, without leaving your home computer. You can mail them out. You can take articles from geoengineeringwatch.org. We have nearly 2,700 postings, over 2,700, I believe now. Search the various sections: engineering winter, engineering drought, engineering wildfires, aerosol spraying, film footage. Send these links to appropriate individuals. Try to wake them up on this issue while it can still make a difference. This effort will, in fact, take all of us. And again, time is running out rapidly. And for the record, I'm fully aware that there are a great many that do not believe that final statement I just made. But you will. Wait and see. This follow-up on the masks that we are told are absolutely essential to save us from the COVID pathogen. There's a very long and very concerning list of medically proven negatives regarding extended mask wearing, as I've elaborated on in my previous broadcast. In regard to the question of healthy individuals being forced to wear masks everywhere they go for extended periods, the negatives outweigh any perceived benefit. But some have mistakenly interpreted me as stating that there is no purpose or benefit from masks under any circumstances. I have never made any such statement. There are, of course, appropriate circumstances and settings in which masks provide a safeguard. But wearing a mask everywhere, by everyone, all the time, regardless of the extensive negative health impacts that arise from or that can be caused from wearing masks for extended periods of time, is not reasonable or rational. But again, that being said, I certainly recognize and have always recognized there are circumstances where the masks are absolutely of use and justified, but it is not a this or that scenario. Individual circumstances and settings must be considered in the equation. Further, though, let's ask this question: how many are reusing what is meant to be a disposable mask? Though many sources are claiming that a used disposable mask simply needs to dry out and then it can be reused, this is wrong. Once a disposable single-use mask has been used and is impregnated with moisture and possibly microorganisms, it becomes a petri dish. Organisms can and often do begin to grow in this mask material. This can include fungus. Can a used disposable mask be safely sterilized on a consistent basis? Who can say with certainty? But how many are simply reusing their disposable masks? How many are reusing washable masks without cleaning and sterilizing them? How many health issues will that begin to cause? Mandatory mask regulations across the board, in spite of the negative impacts, even with healthy individuals that are not in circumstances that would justify using a mask, is just another form of breaking down and assaulting societies, not just physically, but mentally. And let's not forget the ventilators that were also pushed like the masks. And once plugged into a ventilator, there was a 90% chance of death. And now it's surfacing that the ventilators were absolutely the wrong approach for this issue. Yet, how tenaciously were they pushed by the power structure, by the medical industrial complex? Because they were being paid. For any patient that got hooked up on a ventilator, the hospitals received $39,000, and so they did it. Just like vaccinations. When pediatricians at 2 years have administered full vaccinations to at least 63% of their patients, they receive massive bonuses from the medical industrial complex, sometimes six-figure bonuses, $400 per patient. Is that not an unbelievable and unimaginable conflict of interest? And so we're right back to what Dr. Baldwin stated earlier that I recited on this broadcast, that those who society has been trained to trust have become predators in a very real sense. We live in a very twisted society that is, again, in its death spiral right now. On that note, this question: is it rational to believe those in power are just trying to protect populations by forcing masks and ventilators? Really? The same power brokers that created COVID-19 to begin with, the same cancerous ruling cabal that's created and forced countless forms of societal assaults, toxic vaccinations, fluoridated water, GMO crops, chemical-covered everything, RF microwave bombardment, now with 5G in the mix, the climate engineering weather warfare assault. The list is much longer and growing by the day. And again, is it rational or reasonable to believe the same rulers that have forced all that was just mentioned on populations is going to act benevolently by pushing full-time mask wearing? Is that reasonable to conclude they would be benevolent in this case? Isn't it interesting that the production of masks was ramped up through the roof, but to find a bottle of hydrogen peroxide, or even more scarce, a bottle of rubbing alcohol, has all been impossible? A single bottle of rubbing alcohol can cost $25 or more on Amazon, if you can find any. And as we carry on these types of discussions, it's imperative that we remember and consider that the entire COVID-19 scenario is a form of bioweapon with a pathogen that was absolutely engineered, a fact that peer-reviewed science study proves, a fact that numerous sources formerly covered going back to 2015, when the science study announcement first came about the, quote, gain-of-function coronavirus characteristic being successfully created by, again, labs in the US and China that worked together on the research and the engineering. How is it possible not to struggle with the conduct of the so-called experts that carry out the bidding for those in power, that routinely lie and deceive so long as it provides a paycheck and a pension? They have lied and denied and continue to lie and deny about more subjects than I could ever cover on this broadcast, about what really happened on 9/11, about the true dangers of vaccinations and the death and suffering they so often cause, about the dangers of fluoridated water. Fluoride is nothing less than an industrial waste, a neurotoxin. About the dangers of radio frequency microwave transmissions, again with 5G currently being at the top of that list. The dangers of chemicals, too many to count. I believe about 150,000 of them in circulation now, with about 2,000 more every year. The geoengineering elephant in the sky continues to be denied by the whole of academia. The true gravity and immediacy of unfolding climate and biosphere collapse not being disclosed to the public. And the mainstream media prostitutes also continue to toe the line for the clinically insane that currently control societies. And let's not forget the almost always bought and paid for so-called judicial system that generally serves the fascist state. Here's a headline report from last week that's a stellar example of so-called justice. Quote, California can't force cancer warning labels for Roundup, federal judge states. So, even though California requires warning labels on cancer-causing products under the state's Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act, approved by voters in 1986, U.S. District Judge William Shub issued a permanent injunction against the labeling. On the same subject, a reminder of this headline from last year. The Trump administration said it wouldn't approve warning labels for products that contain glyphosate. Though all occupants of the White House on both sides of the manufactured political fence are corrupt, and though they are all part of the criminal cabal masquerading as the U.S. government, the current occupants of the White House have truly raised the bar on countless fronts, virtually gutting any and all forms of environmental and human health protection. Question: what rational and sane species would even manufacture an abomination like Roundup in the first place? And now we're told by a federal so-called judge that we don't have any right to even know that Monsanto's toxic brew, Roundup, will give us cancer? We truly live in a planetary asylum, getting worse by the day. And for the record, what do the hardware stores seem to have no supply troubles with? In Home Depot and Lowe's, pallets and pallets of Roundup, when so many other shelves are increasingly thinning out. Let's get back to the bottom line of what will most determine our collective near-term survival. Biosphere collapse. Ongoing record wildfires are devouring what yet remains of Earth's life-giving forests. Climate engineering is core to the equation. This is not a denial of the endless list of anthropogenic activities that are decimating the planet. It is to state that all available data makes clear that climate engineering is the single greatest part of the wildfire problem for numerous reasons. For an in-depth understanding of the unprecedented wildfires, the geoengineering connection, and the core objectives behind the engineered forest and wildfire incinerations, review the entire, quote, engineering wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org on the top toolbar. What other generally unreported factors are determining our collective futures by the day? Formerly frozen methane hydrate deposits are thawing and literally exploding into the atmosphere. If this process continues, we are done in the geologic blink of an eye. I've covered this repeatedly, and I will continue to do so because the gravity of what's unfolding in the polar regions literally carries our collective future in the balance. And please don't believe me. If you want to actually see the proof for yourself, search Siberian methane craters. Look at as many images as you can find and let these images sink in. Many of the images are so shocking, they must be seen to be believed. And the methane expulsions on the Arctic seabed are much larger still. Why is this such a dire scenario? Because methane in the atmosphere over a 10-year time horizon is from 100 to 120 times more potent at trapping heat than CO2. There are enough methane hydrate deposits on our planet to turn Earth into a true sister planet to Venus, dozens of times over. The ocean heat buildup is not counted in most modeling and thus in so-called forecasts for the future. The heating of Earth's bodies of water, its oceans and its freshwater bodies, is already far beyond catastrophic. And points to remember, a cubic meter of seawater can contain 4,000 times the thermal energy as a cubic meter of air. Our oceans and our freshwater lakes and rivers are superheating. Oxygen levels are plummeting. Fisheries are collapsing. Algae blooms are exploding. If the oceans die, if our waterways die, we die. No habitat, no humans. A very, very simple equation. Some academicians have acknowledged this, but what elephant in the room are those so-called scientists completely denying? The human activity that is the greatest single interference with Earth's life support systems ever deployed by the human race. The global climate engineering, weather warfare, biological warfare assault taking place in our skies day in and day out. Our societies and our government and its so-called elected officials are, if we examine their behavior objectively, nothing short of clinically insane. They're completely out of control. Those in power know that our planet's rapidly unraveling life support systems can no longer support the global population. They believe it is their right to determine who lives and who dies. They will continue to ramp up their efforts to control and cull populations. For the moment, COVID-19, a measured burn, is slow enough not to panic global populations. they can and will continue to let loose various versions of pathogens that will continue to alter the equation as we move forward. The engineered COVID-19 scenario has continued to provide cover for rapidly collapsing environments all over the world. Environmental and climate system collapse means collapsing crop yields, collapsing fisheries, and thus collapsing food chains. What happens to societies when there's not enough to eat? The law of the jungle happens, chaos and carnage happens. And we must also remember and consider this wild card regarding our collective survival or demise: global power structures, which are increasingly desperate to retain their strangleholds on power as the paradigm we have all known unravels by the day. Power structures that have the means to wipe out whole populations at will. A reminder of this quote from Zbigniew Brzezinski, former advisor to numerous presidents over a half century. He said this, quote, "Today it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people." We should keep that quote in mind. I brought it up many times. It's core to the equation that's now unfolding. New strains of COVID are now increasingly sickening the young. As Geoengineering has stated all along, there are likely many strains of the COVID-19 pathogen that those in power can let loose and distribute as they choose. Will overt weapons of mass destruction and engineered global conflicts be used against populations as they begin to wake up to the countless power structure assaults being waged against them? Or will those in power choose to utilize much more lethal engineered pathogens to finish carrying out the culling on populations as the planet's life support systems implode? Or is it remotely possible that a critical mass of the global population will awaken before those in power are completely ready for this to occur? Is it at least possible that a critical mass of the human race will rise to the occasion with the realization that we all have a responsibility to the whole? That standing by and doing nothing is absolutely not an option while total tyranny has taken control of governments, militaries, and criminal corporations all over the world. The converging catastrophes that we collectively face are near-term existential threats. This conclusion is mathematically and statistically inarguable if frontline data is objectively examined. The human race is the first known life form in the galaxy to have the knowledge to protect ourselves from our own extinction, yet our species continues its relentless march toward near-term planetary omnicide. Is it clear at this point that knowledge and intelligence don't equate to wisdom? Ever-increasing human technological, quote, advances are not saving us. They're killing us. Our planet's life support systems are imploding. Our planet is in an abrupt climate collapse. It is superheating. We're on track for what's known as Venus syndrome. On that note, this follow-up confirmation headline: temperatures in Siberia were as high as 40 degrees C or 104 Fahrenheit at 5 centimeters above the ground on June 21st, 2020. This is even higher than the official reports of 100.4 degrees. This is a reading of 104 degrees in the Arctic. Those are astoundingly high temperatures. That would be like Northern California being 160 degrees. People don't understand the gravity of what's unfolding. And the methane mentioned earlier is thawing and releasing, entering the atmosphere and covering the planet like a layer of glass, which further fuels the heating. The heat gets in, but it doesn't get out. Climate engineering is doing the same. Short-term, highly toxic cooldowns at the cost of a worsened overall warming because the climate engineering atmospheric aerosols are trapping more heat than they deflect. Total insanity to try to engineer Earth's life support systems like the pharmaceutical industrial cure for planet Earth, covering up the symptoms at the cost of killing the host. That's the mentality we're dealing with. Moving on with more headlines, this anomaly that we can all ponder about from the UK Guardian and other sources, quote, Godzilla dust cloud from Sahara blankets Caribbean on its way to U.S. Air quality sinks to hazardous levels, as biggest cloud seen in a generation. This is the biggest anomaly of its type ever, but is it just dust? Swamps region after transatlantic journey. The report states a vast cloud of Saharan dust is blanketing the Caribbean as it heads toward the U.S. with a size and concentration that experts say hasn't been seen in half a century. It hasn't been seen at all. They always point to some previous time, so people think, oh, it happened before, it must be fine. Not the case. Air quality across most of the region reached, quote, record hazardous levels. Experts who nicknamed the event, quote, the Godzilla dust cloud, warned people to stay indoors and use air filters if they had them. So let's ask this question. If this supposedly had happened before, why is the hazard level now the worst ever? Did it not happen before? Or is there something else in this cloud that we're not being told about? The same scientists and meteorologists tried to convince us that other massive weather radar anomalies, in some cases, were 1,000 square miles of ladybugs that supposedly occurred from Barstow to Riverside, California. 1,000 square miles. That's 10 miles wide, 10 plus miles wide, and almost 100 miles long. That's 1,000 square miles. On another occasion, they told us something even bigger on the radar anomaly was just dragonflies. This is completely absurd. How do these people keep a straight face? How do they look themselves in the mirror? The Saharan dust plume is not just a random act of nature, and not just Saharan dust. The so-called experts know about such events far ahead of time because they're reading scripts of the scheduled weather. Upper-level air currents can and are being manipulated by climate engineering processes, which includes ionosphere heaters. This steers upper-level wind currents. This can contribute to the manipulation of this type of phenomenon. Just as the same weather experts knew the locust swarms were coming far ahead of time, a result of too much rain in all the wrong places at all the wrong times. Again, climate engineering, aka weather warfare, is core to so many of these equations. It's a crown jewel of the military-industrial complex. They can crush populations without those populations ever even knowing they were at war. And about the sun-blocking particulates in Northern California, for example, there are now numerous days when it's bone dry with complete cloud cover, can't pump water because it's blocking the sun from PV panels. It simply looks like another planet, a drying, frying, and soon-to-be burning planet. About the weather, the western U.S. continues to bake, but may undergo a coming engineered weather whiplash cool down in some regions, unless the scheduled weather changes. The heat and UV radiation are now so intense in so many locations that it's all been impossible to grow vegetables and fruits. And I sometimes hear from individuals who deny all that I just stated. But such individuals are the same ones that say things like, isn't it a beautiful day, when skies are completely plastered with highly toxic climate engineering aerosol dispersions. Hear no evil, see no evil. Too many people in that category. And let's take a moment to remember what psychoanalysts like Scott Peck, Dr. Scott Peck, have said on the record from years of study. The hallmark of a healthy mind, of a healthy intellect, is an unyielding willingness to face the truth no matter how dire. How many are in that category? From AccuWeather.com and other sources, Arizona firefighters forced to handle multiple historic fires at once. From that report, a dozen wildfires have torched nearly 400,000 acres in Arizona and have left parts of the state, particularly the southeastern portion, in ruins. This is truly tragic. Some of these areas that burned were so strikingly beautiful, unique ecosystems. The geoengineers do not care about the carnage they cause. And this is not to deny anthropogenic global warming, but it's to say that in the case of the fires, climate engineering is core. Now this, on the same subject, from physicsworld.com and other sources, quote, solar geoengineering might cause unwanted changes in climate, new modeling suggests. You think? They've only been at it for 70 years over our heads, and we still have so-called academia, the so-called experts, pretending it's not happening. From this report, using aerosols to reflect sunlight and cool the planet will weaken storm tracks in the temperate latitudes in both hemispheres, an international team of scientists warns. Their modeling suggests that while such solar geoengineering schemes might, the severity of winter storms, not that that would be good either, is it? They would also stagnate weather systems in summer. This could lead to more intense heat waves and increased air pollution and changes in ocean circulation, all of which is happening now. The report continues. Solar geoengineering involves cooling Earth by reflecting incoming sunlight and is seen by some scientists as a way of mitigating the effects of global warming. One popular strategy involves placing reflective aerosols in the stratosphere using aircraft. They're in the troposphere, generally, and yes, they are using aircraft. And how obvious could this be? How incredibly obvious. And we have society, elected officials, so-called experts all denying what is so clearly occurring above our heads day in and day out. The report then goes on to state this, quote, but the effects of solar geoengineering are unknown. Unknown to who? Only those who have willingly turned two blind eyes to a mountain of data, or what they can see right above their heads, or those so-called experts that have willingly rammed their heads in the sand in order to secure their paychecks and pensions. Report states this as well. Results show that solar geoengineering will not simply reverse climate change. Instead, it has the potential itself to induce novel changes in climate. Do we need experts to tell us this? Who could think that filling the sky with toxic, light-scattering, ozone-destroying, rain cycle disrupting particles is just some benign way of turning down the thermostat on Earth without wreaking havoc, in fact, destroying the entire web of life? Insane asylum. We live in an Orwellian insane asylum, and we are all about to pay the price if we continue on the current course. On that note, regarding existential threats, new from the Arctic News website, heat threatens to destabilize methane hydrates. The report states sea currents are moving hot water from the Pacific Ocean into the Arctic Ocean. Similarly, sea currents are moving hot water from the Atlantic Ocean into the Arctic Ocean. As I mentioned earlier in this broadcast and so many other broadcasts, climate engineering, radio frequency microwave transmissions from facilities like HARP can and are manipulating upper-level wind currents. That in turn alters ocean currents. Now we have warm water pumping into places it should not be. From every conceivable direction, climate engineering is pounding the nails into our collective coffins, including every breath we take, likely also connected to biological assaults, including the COVID pathogen. What's happening in our skies is the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, the greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, short of nuclear cataclysm. In regard to the methane, again, for any that don't yet understand the gravity and immediacy of the threat posed by the thawing and releasing Arctic methane hydrate deposits, if only 0.5% of Arctic methane deposits is released, when this methane enters the atmosphere, mathematically, it would be a 400% increase of the already catastrophic greenhouse gas building up in the atmosphere. To put that equation in broader perspective, if all the methane thought to be in the Arctic released times the equation by 200, game over. On that note, this new reporting from climatenewsnetwork.net, quote, Antarctic melting could bring a much hotter future. How could it not? Why is there a could in there? Why isn't the word would used? There's no could, there's no may, there's no might, there's would. From that report, Antarctic ice is melting with dramatic speed, and as if to highlight the approaching climate catastrophe, a second and separate study finds that the measure of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is now not just higher than at any time in human history or at any interval in the last ice ages. It is the highest for at least 23 million years, and we have done this in 200 years. Changed the planet to a state it has not been in for 23 million years, and at a rate of change that is inconceivable, hundreds of times faster than at any point in time in Earth's paleo history. Another headline from the South China Morning Post, ocean temperatures to rise 4 times more quickly in the next 40 years, warn U.S. and Chinese scientists. If we continue on the current course, we don't need to worry about what's going to happen in 40 years or 30 years or 20 years or even 10 years because we won't be here. The new report, published in the journal Science, suggests that scientists have been underestimating how fast the oceans are really heating. Please stop and consider this is what geoengineeringwatch.org has tried to sound the alarm about for over a decade. It's far worse than anything any official agency has disclosed. Far worse, far more immediate. The report states last year was the hottest on record for ocean temperatures, raising the risk of natural disasters and higher sea levels. The oceans have been absorbing about 93% of the heat produced by human carbon emissions. How much heat is being produced? The planet is currently warming at the thermal energy equivalent rate of 4 to 5 Hiroshima bombs per second. That's 400,000 per day. The heat produced by 400,000 Hiroshima bombs per day. Most of it absorbed by the oceans, now releasing methane. Oceans are superheating. Oxygen content is plummeting. Life forms crashing across the board. I'm running out of time in this on-air broadcast. A few headlines I'm not going to be able to get to, but I want to make mention of. Desertification, understanding the threats of land degradation in an era of land doom. That's from weather.com. A reminder of this headline report from last year from greenbiz.com. More true today than ever. Climate change is affecting crop yields and reducing global food supplies. And there's this new report from multiple sources. Arctic Ocean acidification, worse than expected. Everything across the board. It's not just slightly worse, it's unimaginably worse. From that report, ocean acidification in the Arctic is likely to be even worse than previously thought. The results show that the smallest of the 7 seas will take up to 20% more CO2 over the 21st century than previously expected. Ocean acidification negatively impacts organisms that build calcium carbonate skeletons and shells. In sufficiently acidic waters, these shells become unstable and begin to dissolve. What are we really talking about here? Plankton. The foundation for life on Earth in so many ways. Plankton, the largest single oxygen producer on the planet. Population's over 60% down globally right now. That's conservatively. No plankton, no people. Very, very simple. Our planet had countless climate balancing systems built in, but all of them have been completely overwhelmed. This reminder of a New York Times headline from December of last year, worse than anyone expected. How often do we have to hear this? Air travel emissions vastly outpaced predictions. This should come as no surprise. We've been lied to on every imaginable front. The loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute policy of those in power has been and is relentless. Another headline from numerous sources, climate models underestimate CO2 emissions from permafrost because we have to count methane now, which wasn't included in almost all modeling, just like ocean heat buildup not included. Systemic cover-up of pending planetary omnicide. That's what has and is occurring. This headline, meteorologists predict 2020 will become hottest year on record. There's no question. And that's in spite of falsification of temperatures to the downside, not the upside. The power structure continues to wage weather and biological warfare against populations all over the world. Consider what Martin Luther King stated, one of the most benevolent men to ever walk among us. The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. End quote. What is coming, what we will soon collectively face, is far beyond what most are yet willing to even contemplate. Those in power are using every tool at their disposal to distract and divide populations until the last possible moment. The engineered COVID-19 scenario serves so many agendas for those in power as the planet's life support systems implode. COVID not only mires societies with health and mortality concerns, COVID-19 serves the purpose of dividing and polarizing populations due to issues like wearing masks or not, vaccinations or not. Those who have researched the dangers of vaccinations, for example, don't want them. Those who haven't feel fear and anger toward those who are aware of well-documented vaccine dangers and are behaving accordingly. If there's yet any chance of averting near-term planetary omnicide, the assault on our planet's life support systems must stop on every level and on every front, with the climate engineering, aka weather warfare assault, being at the top of that list. The planet must be allowed to respond on its own to the damage done, or we have no chance. Is there anything we can yet do to make a difference at this late hour? Who can possibly know with certainty the answer to such a question? What is certain is that doing all we can to try and make a difference is the right course of action, is the correct use of our will, is the honorable choice. In order to more effectively make a difference, doing all we can to protect, preserve, and promote our physical and mental health is also essential. I have never considered my body to be my own. It was a gift, a loaner car of sorts. I have always felt compelled and responsible to take the best possible care of the loaner car. Again, doing so makes us more fit and capable for the fight at hand. Like our physical bodies, our perspectives, our philosophies, and our faith must also be exercised and maintained. We must always remember our will can never be taken, ever. Make your voice heard. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn more about how you can help to turn the tide. The sand in the hourglass is rapidly running out. We must make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.